In 2023, a single factory complex in Pyeongtaek, South Korea, loaded memory chips onto cargo pallets bound for two separate customers who could not legally sell each other their own products. One customer assembled those chips into accelerators powering data centers across the United States. The other built them into clusters that Beijing considers a cornerstone of its technological sovereignty. The factory was Samsung. The lever it holds over both is bandwidth. The wall Washington built was supposed to starve one side of the fuel that artificial intelligence runs on. Instead, it drew a line directly through Samsung's product catalog, and Samsung kept selling on both sides of that line, entirely within the rules as written. That is not an accident of enforcement. It is a structural feature of how the restriction was designed, and it hands one company a pressure point that neither the United States nor China can easily neutralize without paying a cost neither government wants to name in public. Here's what that means in practice for anyone watching the next phase of the chip contest unfold. Samsung will determine, through a single product qualification or a single compliance decision, which side absorbs the first real shock. This video follows that logic from the factory floor to the capitals, trying to manage it. Samsung supplies what is called high bandwidth memory to Nvidia for use in the H100 and its successors. These are the accelerators filling racks in American and allied data centers as fast as construction crews can pour concrete. That supply relationship is established, publicly confirmed through Nvidia's own disclosures, and strategic in a way that makes Samsung difficult to replace even in theory. At the same time, reports from multiple trade publications suggest Samsung supplies standard dynamic random access memory, a less restricted product tier, to customers within the Huawei Ascend supply chain. Samsung has not publicly confirmed specific volumes, and the precise figures are contested. But the structural fact is documented. China accounts for roughly 30% or more of Samsung's semiconductor revenue by analyst estimates, and South Korea is simultaneously a formal United States treaty ally. Imagine a single steel mill shipping beams to two construction crews building competing towers on opposite ends of the same block. The mill does not pick a winner. It cashes both checks and hopes neither crew notices the other's invoice. The difference here is that the regulators have noticed. They just have not found a move that does not cost them something. High bandwidth memory and standard dynamic random access memory are not the same product, and that distinction is where the legal permission to run this arrangement lives. High bandwidth memory stacks multiple memory dies vertically. Picture a column of dinner plates shrunk into the width of a fingernail, with data lanes threading between every layer. Standard dynamic random access memory sits flat, one plate, one lane. The stacked version is faster per chip connection, and its advanced nodes are currently subject to United States export licensing pressure for shipments into China. The flat version, for now, is not. My own read of the technical situation is this. The gap between high bandwidth memory and standard dynamic random access memory is real, especially in training workloads where raw bandwidth per chip is the binding constraint. But it is not the firewall Washington seems to assume it is. Huawei's own materials and some independent researcher reports suggest that at sufficient cluster scale, dense interconnect architectures can partially compensate for lower per-chip bandwidth on certain inference tasks. Enough garden hoses bolted together with the right manifold can move more water than the regulators assumed when they wrote the rule. No fully independent benchmark of Huawei's cluster-level throughput has been publicly released, so the ceiling is genuinely uncertain. But the assumption that standard dynamic random access memory is benign enough to leave uncontrolled suggests someone in the export control apparatus has not fully closed that argument. South Korea's public posture on all of this is studied quiet. Seoul has not joined United States-led export control coalitions at the same level of specificity as the Netherlands or Japan on semiconductor equipment. Reports citing unnamed government officials suggest Washington has applied escalating diplomatic pressure. The substance of those exchanges is not fully public. I think Korea's silence here is not neutrality. It is a calculated bet that ambiguity pays more than any formal commitment to either side, and that bet has a finite shelf life as the rule revision cycles accelerate. A country can stay technically compliant and strategically uncommitted for only so long before the party applying the pressure decides that ambiguity is itself a hostile act. The steelman for the opposing view deserves a real hearing before I explain why I think it does not resolve the problem. 3 points in order. First, the high bandwidth memory versus standard dynamic random access memory tier gap is real and measurable, especially in training. Ascend clusters without cutting-edge stacked memory face a genuine throughput ceiling. Second, Samsung's China revenue share, while large, has reportedly been declining as Chinese domestic substitution grows, which means the leverage Washington is pressing on may be eroding on its own, making eventual compliance less painful than current numbers imply. Third, Seoul is not actually silent on every dimension. Korea has participated in some multilateral export coordination and has its own reasons to dislike Chinese competition in memory, which creates a partial alignment with United States goals that the silence framing undersells. All three are fair. The tier gap is real, the revenue exposure is shifting, and Seoul is not purely passive. What they do not collectively explain is why Washington has not already closed the standard dynamic random access memory loophole if it is genuinely harmless. The rule exists in its current form because someone in the export control apparatus understands that closing it may accelerate the problem it is meant to contain. If Samsung exits the Chinese memory market under United States pressure, Chinese domestic producers gain the volume demand and the pricing floor they need to scale their own production. The cure maps the disease's next move for it. Washington is asking Samsung to kick away a leg of a stool while standing on it, and signaling that the floor will get more slippery if Samsung refuses. That is not a stable equilibrium, it is a countdown. My honest assessment is that Korea has made a rational choice that cannot survive the next major rule, revision cycle, intact. The moment Washington formally expands controls to the standard dynamic random access memory tier at meaningful specifications, Samsung has to choose openly what it has so far avoided choosing at all. And whatever Samsung decides in that moment, the Chinese domestic memory industry will treat as a map of where to pour its next round of investment. The restriction, again, becomes the catalyst. The wall did not separate the two sides of the chip contest. It installed a single toll booth operator with a key to both lanes, and neither side wants to be the one to fire the toll collector. Samsung controls more bandwidth than any other memory company on Earth. That is the thing both sides are racing to maximize, the thing the export rule cannot cleanly partition, and the reason a factory in Pyeongtaek has more structural power over this contest than most of the policy documents written about it. The most powerful position in a trade war is not always the one holding the biggest restriction. Sometimes it is the one company neither side can afford to lose. If Washington expands controls to cover the standard dynamic random access memory tier Samsung currently ships into China, does Samsung comply and hand domestic Chinese producers the market share they need to scale? Or does Seoul find a legal structure that keeps the revenue and lets Washington look the other way? I want to know what you actually think is going to happen when that decision lands. Leave it in the comments. If you want the next layer of this story when it breaks, and it will break faster than the official announcements will admit, subscribe and turn on notifications because the press release will not say any of what you just heard.